In discussing the basic principles of digital computing, we will consider three major aspects: the hardware of the computer, the nuts and bolts, the electronics that goes to make up a computer; the software of a computer, the programs that live inside the computer, the programs that people write; and finally, the problem-solving techniques that people must develop in order to make their problems amenable to solution by a digital computer. Now, in discussing the hardware of a digital computer, let's first look at the basic block diagram of any digital computer. The three major components are the input devices, the central processing unit, and the output devices. The CPU is divided into two sections, namely the processing section where all the arithmetic and logical circuitry exists, and the memory, the core memory of the computer generally exists. Now, this basic block diagram gives rise to a little more complex diagram which will give us a better idea of a digital computer. The more complex diagram comes into being because of the fact that the hardware of a digital computer is really limited by the input-output devices. The input-output devices work at millisecond speeds, while the electronics that exists in the CPU work at microsecond speeds. And computer designers very soon found that they needed to buffer the input-output equipment as well as any auxiliary storage devices like disks and drums and tapes from the central processing unit. They did this buffering by a small computer known as a channel. There are two types of channels. One is known as a multiplexer and the other is known as selector channels. But they essentially operate as buffers between the central processing unit, the core memory, which can be divided into two types of memory, fast and slow, just depending upon how fast it reacts, and the auxiliary storage devices and I/O equipment. Now, in order, this basic block diagram of the hardware of a digital computer gives rise to a much more complex organization of a computer very quickly. When we come to third-generation equipment, we come to the same general notion. We still have the central processing unit. We still have input-output devices, and we still have the various types of memory. But we've added a new dimension. We've added a dimension of communications where people in remote locations can have a small computer which has the same general block diagram that we first looked at. It has a central processing unit of its own. It has input-output devices of its own. But it also has the ability to communicate with the main computer. Likewise, we can have remote console communications. We can have typewriters, cathode ray tubes with typewriter attachments communicating over the telephone lines or other types of communications lines to the main computer. Now, if you look at this complex situation and imagine the variety of users sitting at these remote locations, we see that the natural question arises is, how does the computer control all these things? How can one user sitting at one location solve a problem in accounting, another user sitting at another location solve a problem in a ballistic trajectory, another user solve or ask questions about student records, and what have you? Well, all this is done by the use of software. All this is done by the use of software. Generally, the largest dimension of this software is known as an operating system. It's a very expensive piece of software. One operating system that's in use by major manufacturers is made up of some 3 million instructions. It took some seven years to develop it to the stage that it exists today, and it took some 700 man-years to develop that operating system. But all this happened in a building block fashion, and one of the major components of this building blocks that go to make up an operating system are known as compilers or translators. They are the programs, the software that permits me, a user, to communicate with this computer. Now, if we're going to understand how the software and the hardware interact in a computer, we're going to have to look at analogies. We're going to have to see much more simple situations so that we get the big picture as it comes upon us. Now, in solving a program, we have to think of a very systematic way of coming to grips with a problem. And the first analogy that we'll look at is a problem of a man who owns a motel, the Abacus Motel. Now, the Abacus Motel is made up of some 16 rooms, an office, and 15 rooms in the motel. Now, the Abacus Motel, the owner of the Abacus Motel, has a man that he's hired. Let's look at the man as a robot. He can only understand some very, very simple commands. He can only understand commands that are explicit and that there is no ambiguity involved. What's more, he has no memory. He can't remember 2 instructions at a time. And so, in order for the manager to tell this man how to keep the motel clean, he devises a sequence of instructions to help him keep the motel clean. Now let's look at the sequence of instructions that the manager prepared so that Archie could keep the hotel clean. Clean means clean the entire room. Bed means make the bed. Fill means place new supplies in the room in which Archie is working. Go to is an instruction which usually has a number after it, which will mean go to the room number indicated instead of the next room, because ordinarily Archie just goes from room to room unless he bumps into a go-to type instruction. And stop means to go back to the office, the work is done. Now, the manager, in order to figure out the first night's work, looked at what problem faced him. He found that room 11 needed cleaning, room 12 needed the bed made, and room 20 needed supplies. So he sat down and drew up what's known as a flow chart of his problem. He wanted to put in diagrammatic form what his problem was so that he could write the program which would be able to be executed by Archie and keep the motel clean. So the flow chart has Archie starting his work, cleaning room 11, make the bed in room 12, fill room 20, and stop. So from this flow chart then, the manager then drew up the program which Archie would execute. Now the program, as we see it here, is go to 11, clean, bed, go to 20, fill, stop. Now each of these instructions are put someplace. Go to 11 is inserted in the box of the office. Remember the office room sitting off on the side of the hotel. Clean is inserted in the box of room 11. After Archie went to the office and found the instruction go to 11, he went to room 11, he opened the little box in room 11, found the instruction clean, and cleaned room 11. Then he went automatically to room 12, looked in the instruction box of room 12, found the instruction bed, and made the bed in room 12. Then he went to room 13. The instruction he found in room 13 is go to 20, so he moves around to room 20. In the box for room 20, he finds the instruction fill. That means he has to fill the supplies of room 20. He goes to room 21, he finds the instruction stop and returns to the office. So here's the program, and Archie executed the program, and the hotel was clean for that night. Now, we have a second night's problem. The same type of problem. Room 10 needs cleaning, room 11 needs the bed made, room 12 needs the bed made, and room 13 needs some supplies. So the manager wrote a program to fulfill the charge of this particular flow chart. Now let's look at that program, and we find this sequence. Go to 10, clean, bed, bed, fill, go to 10, stop. That's the program. Okay, but the manager he did all right, he put go to 10 is inserted in the box. Clean is inserted in the box of room 10. Bed is inserted in the box of room 11. Bed is inserted in room 12. Fill in room 13. In room 14, he puts the instruction go to 10. Now let's see what would happen to Archie. When Archie gets to room 13, he has done his work, goes to room 14, finds the instruction go to 10, go to room 10. In room 10, what will he find? He will find clean. He'll mean to clean the box, clean the room 10. He will then go to room 11. He'll find bed. And he'll go around in this loop. And he will never get out of this loop. This is an infinite loop. This is the type of error many programmers make. This error is, what programmers call errors like this, is a bug. There's a bug in the program. Well, naturally, the manager found Archie going around in this little loop and knew he had to rewrite the program, and did rewrite the program, and a correct version of that is here. Go to 10, clean, bed, fill, and stop. Now, in this motel Archie manager situation, let's compare that to what goes on in a digital computer. Let's compare the motel to the computer. In an electronic computer, we have the transistors, diodes, wires, relays, fuses, the framework of the computer. They all make up the set and the inflexible hardware traits which affect the speeds and the types of programs that your computer can handle. In the motel, we have the motel itself, the letterboxes, and the set of abilities of the custodian and the manager, and all affect the type of programs that the Bacchus Motel can handle. Now, in the computer, we have a unique set, or what we call a repertoire of instructions which can be executed. Likewise, in the Bacchus Motel, we have a repertoire of instructions. In our case, the repertoire, the custodian could only understand and execute 5 instructions, and that was his repertoire. Now, in the computer, instructions are executed one at a time, in sequence, one right after the other, until a specific instruction causes the sequence to be changed, a branching type instruction. Now, in the Bacchus Motel, the custodian likewise did one instruction at a time, went to each room in sequence, unless he found storage of the computer. Now, in the Bacchus N, each instruction was stored in a letterbox, which corresponds to the cell in the computer. Each letterbox was an address, which was the room number. And the total number of letterboxes available, in our case 16, can be considered the motel memory's storage. Now, finally, in a stored program, it's planned and created by some man. The computer is a slave. It's an idiot, we say, to the pre-stored strategy that exists in the program. If the logic of the programmer is false, it follows just as night does the day, the computer results will be false. So we say that the machine is sort of a high-speed moron. It doesn't think, it merely follows the directions. Likewise, in the Bacchus Inn, the custodian's care of the Bacchus Motel is dependent upon the manager. He's the programmer. All the custodian, all that Archie can do is follow the instructions in each letterbox. And if the instructions are incorrect, a dirty motel as the result of poor programming techniques. Now, as we consider this analogy of a computer and a program, let's look at a little more complex situation. It's a situation from history. It's the situation of a Milan d'Agasta. He was a Spanish patriot who in January the 1st in 1801 was taken from his home and put in a cell which was called the Pit of Doom. He was put there, and he never knew how long he would have to stay in this dark, miserable, dingy dungeon. He knew after being there a short time that no one would speak to him, that his only contact with the outside world would be 3 meals a day, which would be lowered to him in his cell. He knew that if he didn't do something creative with his mind, that he would soon lose his mind. Well, he was locked in this pit of doom for over 6.5 years. But when a revolution occurred and he was released from his cell, his releasers were amazed to find out that he still maintained all his senses. As a matter of fact, he knew the exact day and year that it was. And they were amazed that with such little contact of reality, how he was able to do this. And they asked him, how did this come about? And he explained that after being there 5 days, he knew he had to do something creative. And so he looked around his cell, and he found 4 containers. He found a can, a box, a bag, and a shoe. And he found a number of stones, and he found some sticks. And he says, I'm going to keep track of what day it is. And the way I'm going to keep track of the days is every time I get a meal, I'm going to record it by placing a stick in my shoe. So this 3 meals became his counter for 24 hours. He was going to keep the bag as the counter of his years. And he knew in his own mind that if it was longer than 20 years, no matter what he did, he wasn't going to be able to handle it. He would go out, he would lose his mind. And likewise, the box became his counter of months. And he had 12 stones sitting very carefully near his box, and the can became his counter of days. Now, these were his artifacts that he was going to use to keep track of the day, month, and year that existed. This was his computer, and now he had to devise a program which would help him keep track of this. Next, let's look at Milan d'Agasta's flowchart, which would implement the plan that he had in mind. He decided upon the execution of this plan after he had been in prison 5 days. So he put 5 stones in the can, his day counter. Now he came down to a decision box and he asks, did food come? If the answer is no, he continues waiting. If the answer is yes, he puts 1 stick in the shoe for the count of his first meal. He next feels in the shoe to see if he has 3 sticks in his shoe. If the answer is no, he comes back and waits for the 2nd or 3rd meal, what have you. When he finally has 3 sticks in the shoe, he knows he's at the end of a day. He takes the 3 sticks out of the shoe and moves to the 2nd part of his counting process. So he adds 1 stone to the can, indicating he's been there at least a day. Now he's been doing this for some time, and he wants to know, are there 29 stones now in the can? If the answer to this is yes, he wants to see, is it the month of February? If there is 1 stone in the box, remember, is his month counter, and he knows that there is that he is in February, in fact. And he adds 1 stone to the box, indicating that you're now in the 2nd month. Now he wonders whether there are 3, 7, or 11 stones in the bag. Now what's this for? Well, remember that on leap year we have 29 days in the month of February. If in fact it is 3, 7, or 11 stones in the bag, you are in fact in a leap year, and you must take all the stones out of the can and come back to the next day. If it's not a leap year, you take out all but 1 of the stones in the can and move back to the next food counting. Now, Why did he take all but one stone out of the can? Because if it wasn't a leap year, he had 29 stones in the can, because he went through this branch, and there are only 28 days in February, so he had to leave one stone in the can, indicating he was in the 1st of March. Okay, now let's come back to this branch point where I went that way for the February test, and let's say that there are not 29 stones now in the can. Okay, he wants to know if there's not 29, are there 30 stones now in the can? And if the answer to that, no, are there 31 stones in the can? If the answer to that is yes, you're in a 31-day month situation, and you'll add one stone to the box. So you want to know now, are you at the end of the year? Are there 12 stones in the box? If the answer to that is yes, you'll take all the stones out of the box and add one to the bag. The bag is your year counter. Move up here, take all the stones out of the can, come back to 1 and start the process again. Come back again to this decision point, which we went this way. This time, let's go this way. Are there 30 stones now in the can? And the answer is yes. Are there 3 or 5, 8 or 10 stones in the bag? Now, why 3, 5, or 8 or 10 stones in the box? Excuse me. Well, those are the months that are 30-day months. Why do I say 30-day months? You remember 30 days had September, April, June, and November. Well, if you think about it, you'll see that 3 is the correct count to tell that you're in April. You have 3 stones in the box, so you've passed March, and you're now going through the day count for April. And likewise, if you do the counting on your fingers, you'll find that 5 and 8 are the other 30-day months. So if that's the case, we'll come down here, add one stone to the box, take all the stones out of the can, and go back again to count our meals. If the answer is no, it's not one of the 30-day months, we'll go back and we're going to come back down through the 31-day branch on the next go-around. Needless to say, this is a complicated flow chart. Needless to say that there were many exceptional cases you had to consider. You had to consider the 29 days in February. You had to consider the leap years indicated by these numbers. Notice you might have wanted to say 4, 8, and 12. You might have wanted to put the numbers 4, 8, and 12 rather than 3, 7, and 11. And if you did say 4, 8, and 12, you would have in fact had a bug in your program. Thinking this through, I'm sure you'll see that. Likewise, 3, 5, 8, and 10. He had to consider the 30-day months. And you might have wanted to put 4, 6, 9, and 11. But if you did, you would have a bug in your program. And so, as we look at this flow chart, we see the kind of thinking that a programmer must go through. I've given you the flow chart. It's a solved problem now. The problem now remains to translate this flow chart into a program. But closing your minds for a second, or perhaps after this lecture, try to recreate the flow chart, and you'll see the difficulty in coming up with a count of the day, month, and year that faced Milan de Gesta. Now let's look at a third analogy, which will help us understand the relationship of the computer, the programmer, and the translator. Let's imagine that a person wishes to have a recipe for macaroons. And the only recipe that he has at his disposal is a recipe written in Spanish. Recall that a recipe is divided into 2 parts, generally speaking, the ingredients and the procedure how to execute the recipe. Now, before I can do anything with the recipe, I must have the recipe translated into English. If I'm a cook, an English cook, I must have this Spanish recipe translated. And so I give it to a translator, and he translates that Spanish recipe for macaroons into a corresponding English recipe. And perhaps more clearly now, we can see the division between the ingredients in the recipe and the procedure to make the macarons. We have the input to the recipe, the ingredients, the egg whites, the salt, the teaspoon of vanilla, and what have you. And now we have this procedure, this program, how to make macarons. Notice that in the program we have commands. Let's identify the commands. We have beat, which is a command. We have gradually add, which is a command. We have beat again over here, another command. Drop is another command. Bake is another command. And so we have those types of commands. But hidden within this recipe is another special kind of command. It's a conditional command. It's beat till stiff. It's the kind of command that is the real guts of the ability of a computer to make decisions. It's a conditional branching instruction. It's the kind of instruction that would have appeared in the programmed version of Milan de Gesta's flowchart, where he asked whether it was a leap year or not. It's a conditional branching instruction. Now, we can also look at these programming problems as being broken up into subprograms. If I had a recipe for making a pie, the recipe for a pie could be broken up into two parts: the pie, the filling, and the crust. We call that subprogramming. We break a program up into its parts. Now let's look how a computer handles a program. It has to take the source program, bring it into the machine, which is surrounded by an operating system. A portion of the operating system is a translator. The translator plays the role of the person who translated our Spanish recipe into the language that I could understand, namely English. In this case, the source program is written in the language that the particular programmer likes to write in, and the translator is a translator from that language that the programmer is writing into the language of this particular computer. After the computer does this translation, it creates what's known as an object program. The distinction between the source program and the object program is the source program is to the Spanish recipe as the object program is to the English recipe. And finally, we get a listing of the program out. Now, not only do we have to translate a program, but we usually want to execute a program. So we have this business of the source program coming in, the language translator translating it, creating an object program, and then a second phase, namely go back and get the data, go back and get the ingredients and execute the program. Go back and execute the making of macarons. And as the computer takes the object deck, brings it back into the computer, picks up the data, and creates the results of the program. Now we have talked about programs, computers, programming languages, and problem solving. Perhaps the two major languages used in the United States today for problem solving by programmers are Fortran and COBOL. They will be probably the languages you will use if you wish to be involved in computer programming. Fortran is a program, generally speaking, for the mathematical types of problems. COBOL is a language for the business type of problems. But there are many languages, many computer programming languages, and there probably will be more by the time that you are working in the business world.